Hey, what's up? This is Chris. It's nice to see you guys again here. In this video, I'd like to talk about a camera that I have been using for quite a while. Actually, I've been using it for 3 years. It's the EOS R. And in this video, we'll check out how well this camera holds up after these years. Before diving into it, if you enjoy photography, subscribe to my channel. Let's grow this community together. So before talking about the strengths and the drawbacks of this camera, maybe let's go through the specs of this camera first. The EOS R rocks a 30 megapixel sensor. It has more than 5,000 focus points, and basically you can focus on anywhere with this camera. And the ISO of this camera ranges from 100 to 40,000. It's even expandable to 50 to 100,000. The maximum burst rate of this camera is 8 frames per second, but there is a catch for that. We'll talk about it a little bit later. It supports 4K video and 1080p video. You can also shoot in C-Log, which gives you more flexibility when you are doing post-editing. When we are shooting high quality pictures and videos, you don't want to miss out the UHS 2 compatibility. And of course, this camera supports UHS 2 SD cards, so you can have a faster writing and reading speed. And lastly, it has a flip screen, so it's very convenient for us YouTubers to shoot ourselves and see what we are actually shooting. I can always see what's in the frame of my video even when I'm filming myself. And maybe let's talk about the strengths of this camera first before going into the drawbacks. I think people want to hear the strengths first. I would say this camera, the EOS R, is actually an all-rounder with an affordable price tag. If you have watched some of my previous videos, you'll know that I'm actually a wedding photographer, and I often have to shoot in low light condition. For example, I have to capture the bride, the groom, and the guests watching the video playback of their wedding ceremony during the day. And the video playback usually takes place at night during the wedding reception. And at that moment, the venue, basically all the lights will be switched off because they are using the projectors to project the video on the screen. And I have to capture the reaction of the guests and the bride and the groom as well. And the only light source that I can make use of will be the light from the projector, because all the lights are switched off. But as you can see in this picture, the image is actually pretty clean without too much noise. Even I have added some noises to it to give it the vibe of film photography. But it's still pretty clean, as you can see. So I would conclude that the low light performance of this camera is really good. And the EOS R has snappy and accurate autofocus. Even when I was shooting in such a low light condition, I can still often get the focus correctly. And when I was shooting some moving subjects, it can get around 8 out of 10 pictures focused correctly. And that's more than acceptable to me. But just in case if you have to shoot a picture like this one, you have to be careful. I used to shoot quite a lot for my client at this place from a similar angle, with the big skyline in the background while my client standing in front of it. And sometimes the camera will focus on the background rather than the subject. I can't tell if that's the problem of my Sigma lenses or the EOS R, because I've heard that you have to calibrate the Sigma lenses before you can actually do the autofocus correctly. But I cannot tell if that's the problem of my lenses or not, because this problem only occurs when I was shooting in this similar situation. So just be careful if the subject that you are capturing is more in the frame and you are shooting against a complicated background. Apart from that, this camera actually has a decent battery life. When I was shooting at a wedding day, I can always shoot the morning, the whole morning and the early afternoon without switching a battery. And that's pretty impressive when you compare to other mirrorless cameras such as the Sony Alpha 7 Mark III. Some of the wedding photographers that I know, they use the Sony and they have to switch around 2 to 3 battery even just in the morning and the early afternoon. But of course you cannot compare it to the DSLR counterparts because you don't have to use the live view that often on DSLR. Of course it will save more battery for you. And I would say the Canon has been doing quite a good job on the user interface. But of course I can be a little bit biased on this point because I've been a Canon user for a long time. This could be my muscle memory that makes me think that the Canon user interface is user-friendly. But it's undeniable that I can always access every function that I was looking for within a few clicks, and that's not the case on some other cameras. You have to dive very deep into the menu to find that specific function. That's why I really love the user interface of Canon cameras. And as I mentioned earlier, this camera has a flip screen. You should have no problem with filming yourself. And for the video department, I would say that the 1080p video quality is really good. The code that this camera has been using is really good with a lot of data. And you can always use that large amount of data captured to do editing and color correcting in the post-processing. So just in case if you don't know what C-Log is, it's actually a log profile that gives your video a flat look. So you can always bring back the highlight, the shadows, and all the details a little bit later in the video editing. And after talking about a bunch of the strengths of this EOS R, we'll talk about the drawbacks. The first complaint that I want to make is the slow burst rate. I would say the maximum burst rate of 8 frames per second is actually acceptable even compared to the standard nowadays. But that's only true when you are using the single focus mode. When you switch to the continuous focus mode, you will only get around 5 frames per second, and that's below average. Things get even worse when you have the flash on. You only get around 2 to 3 frames per second as far as I remember. And that's completely unusable in my opinion. I don't know why would Canon think that is acceptable. And there is no uncropped 4K on this camera. You can only shoot in 4K with a 1.8 times crop factor. So you can hardly get any wide angle shots if you are shooting in 4K. And basically I would say the 4K mode is also unusable on this camera, so I will only stick to 1080p, just like right now I'm shooting in 1080p. And there is no IBIS, no embodied image stabilization at all. You can only rely on the electronic image stabilization. But when you are using the electronic image stabilization, your video will be cropped in a bit to allow the camera to do the stabilization for you. And of course, when you are doing the stabilization with the software, the quality is usually worse than when you are doing it optically. And the last complaint that I want to make is that this camera relies too much on the touchscreen. You cannot develop any kind of muscle memory when you're using a touchscreen because the button layout on the touchscreen always changes. And I really miss the old days of using a DSLR. You can always access every function that you want with a few clicks of button out of muscle memories. But that's enough complaints. I would say this camera after all is actually pretty good considering the price point. So if you are looking for an affordable full frame camera, this camera is still worth to get it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.